Hi everyone, my name is Jesse Lynn.
And I'm Angela Lynn. Welcome back to another episode of But Where Are You Really From? Welcome back for our next batch of episodes. Something new that we're introducing, in addition to kind of the way we've been running things thus far, is we are now introducing a new format for the show called minis. The kind of like idea behind this is that we know not all of you have that much time to listen to our full episodes all the time. We hope you still come back for those, and we'll still be doing full episode deep dive topics. But there are also topics sometimes that we want to cover, but we know cannot fill like 40 plus minutes worth of talking that we still want to give attention to. So these minis, you're going to see them. We're going to try out kind of alternating between minis and full lengths every other episode. And they should be, hopefully, between like anywhere between 10 to 20 minutes, right? That's kind of what we're shooting for. Yeah, so
Yeah.
little
Yeah,
snack
yeah.
bites for you.
One of the things we wanted to talk about is what is a himbo? And so, if you're familiar with the word bimbo, actually, I think not a lot of people are because I recently had this conversation with people. They're like, what's a bimbo?
What?
For those of you who don't know what a bimbo is basically the female version of like a dumb blonde slut kind of thing. Person who gets around, but you know they're not super intelligent. I would say like Anna Nicole Smith is the personification of a bimbo. We really want to talk about this idea of a himbo, which is the male version of this. So a dumb, slutty male version of a bimbo, because we think it's been really interesting that there has been this like rise of Asian representation for guys in the form of a himbo. We actually got this. I saw this thing. I think it was on NPR, and they
It was
did this.
PBS because I rewatched it.
So they were doing this like summation of like representation of Asian male characters throughout the history of cinema, and of course, like at the very early time periods, you had basically not even Asian people playing these Asian people, and it's always in the form of like very like neutered villain kind of format. And now you have kind of what you see in Crazy Rich Asians or The Good Place, where you have this very like masculine slash slutty representation of Asian men. And so we really want to talk about that because I think it's super interesting to see that evolution over the past few years, especially the last, I want to say like 5 years. It's kind of like a really quickly bringing that kind of character to life in different film and TV.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious how it first came about because it does feel like a bunch of Asian himbos just like appeared on the Hollywood market like around the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Like I never watched the show, but I think the first like main one was Crazy Ex-Girlfriend had a hot Asian dude as like the main crush or a love interest for her. And
Mm-hmm.
I never watched that show, but I just remember from like all the commercials, he was featured a lot and he was definitely like super dumb, but like portrayed as like highly desirable. And then I don't know in reference to that how many years apart or whatever, but The Good Place has had been on air for like
Jason
quite a long time.
Mendoza.
And yeah,
Yeah.
Jason
Yeah.
Mendoza appeared around the same time, and then it was just kind of like this like snowball effect because Crazy Rich Asians we've talked about with
So
that like
good.
really intense shower scene. I'll always remember
Oh,
that.
he
Yeah.
was so hot.
So yeah, I don't know. It's almost like Hollywood kind of like secretly whispered to each other that now's the turning tide for Asian men to like start portraying them this way.
Well, I think it's a money thing, right? Like once they had like a cast of characters that were not traditionally portrayed in that fashion, and it like worked out, then they were like, "Oh, this is like maybe this is a winning formula. Like let's try this again." And I think that it's gone to the point where it's proven to be successful in money making, and that's why they have these characters in place. And personally, I like to think that audiences are bored of seeing the same trope of like masculine white guy with like unattainable body like Chris Hemsworth in Thor. Not that I'm saying that all of these Asian himbos have attainable bodies. It's like also like no, like most people don't look like that. But I feel like there's a certain level of like boredom with this like same look, and people are interested in seeing different kinds of hotness portrayed.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's a similar conversation that we've had before about media representation in general, that it's all kind of like baby steps because it's nice now that we get to
Yes.
see Asian men who have been traditionally like demasculinized. How do you say that? Whatever that word is?
You can say like
Feminized. But it's
feminized,
not fem.
neutered,
It's, yeah, neutered,
neutered,
portrayed as like totally unattractive and like
sexless.
nerdy and blah blah
Yeah.
blah, and now being seen as like super hot, but they're all super dumb is like mostly how they're portrayed, and that's why the himbo term came around. So it's like it's
Yeah.
baby steps because I don't think this is the end goal at all. Like for now it's fun to
No.
like drool over Jason Mendoza type characters, but the hope is that in the future it can evolve so that they can be both seen as attractive and intelligent or complex, like not one dimensional dumb butts.
My feeling is that they're like really dialing into this like hotness aspect of it because I think in the portrayal of Asian men, even though in the past they were portrayed as sexless or neutered, there was still this element of either villainy, which within that villainy there was cunning or some level of intelligence. And so it's always kind of like given that the Asian character has intelligence, but never given that they had like anything else. It was like a Ken doll that's smart. So I think they're really dialing into this hotness aspect of it because it kind of flips your idea of what that character would be at first glance. You know, like when you first see Jason Mendoza in The Good Place, you're like, oh, a Buddhist monk. Like, you're sold, right? You're like, okay, like, I believe that because that kind of fits within that archetype. And then they flip it where, like, they're like, oh, actually, he's a moron, like a really hot
Yeah,
moron.
yeah.
And you're like, oh, like, I'm very interested now. It's different from what I've seen before. And I think that characterization is like what's drawing people in. But I also agree with you. Like, that's definitely not where we want to stay. Like, we want the character to be multidimensional, right? They can be intelligent, they can be stupid as well. They can be hot, they can be ugly. Like, but all of these things play into, I think, how likable a character is. So I think that it's definitely not where we want to stop, and it's like where we want to continue forward.
If anyone actually watches the PBS thing that we were talking about, the like what is an Asian himbo little video, it's like 10 minutes ish. It's worth watching, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
One thing I felt like they really left out was the influence of K-pop and Korean dramas in why
Mm.
Asian men are seen as desirable right now. Because
Mm.
I noticed this huge gap in their analysis. I was like, the guys that people who are attracted to Asian men right now think are most attractive are like BTS and like Korean drama leads. Because if you watch any social media of people like drooling over Asian men, it's usually those guys and
Mm-hmm.
not just the Jason Mendozas, because that's still relying on kind of like mainstream Western media featuring
Yeah.
those people versus like Korea really exported this like huge, wave of like potential people to love. And that's interesting because even though we talked about this himbo being kind of like, or the Asian himbo being leaning into like highly masculine, we've talked about before that like Korean representation of men is often a little bit
Yes.
more fluid. Like they have
Yes.
beautiful skin because they know how to do their skincare.
They wear
They wear
makeup.
makeup. Yeah, and they can be attractive not being like highly masculine but actually having a little bit of like feminine charisma. And it's been interesting to see like whenever I'm watching TikToks or whatever, and people are like um, over romanticizing K drama leads, where they're like watching K dramas and having unrealistic expectations of men to come into their lives based on the way that the K drama men are behaving. I'm like, how is this being completely ignored as to like there has to obviously be an influence of like that huge kind of like getting used to seeing Asian men and finding them attractive and kind of influencing why Western media might start portraying Asian men, this way.
Yeah. I think the PBS thing is like really focused around like film and TV, but I totally agree with you that like what's represented in film and TV may not be necessarily what the general public is interested in. And that totally backs your point of like a lot of people are interested in this different look that Korea exports, and it's not this like westernized, Americanized, like mask dumb himbo thing that is in film and TV.
I think another like interesting direction that things are going in is like yes, we have the Jason Mendozas and the crazy ex-girlfriend and whatever portrayals of like that's kind of token Asian himbo, right? Because the rest of the
Sure.
cast is usually white. Um,
Yeah.
Something I want to point out is that usually those shows are not run by Asian people, right? And so one
Mm.
kind of nod in that, or two nods in that direction. We talked all about Everything Everywhere All at Once, and you talked specifically about how you loved Ki Hui Kwan's character when they did the kind of like one of the multiverse options where they were kind of in like glam, like tuxedo and like,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
evening gown dress, and he was really hot. So that's one portrayal. And at the same time, Turning Red came out, that Disney, the Pixar
Yes.
movie with
Yes.
the red panda, which I freaking loved. And that boy band that they were all obsessed with, one of the characters was like a K-pop boy band type.
Uh
And
huh.
so, and everyone was like fawning over all of them, but like, you know, he's one of them. And so both those were created by Asian people. Well, at least half the
Mm.
Daniels are Asian in Everything Everywhere.
Yes.
And Turning
Yes.
Red was created by an Asian Canadian filmmaker. So I think also like as Asian people become more integrated into the scripts and the like content ideas behind movies and TV shows, we'll also start to see a more diverse portrayal of attractive male Asian characters, whether they be stupid or smart. But like I like that we're starting to see kind of this like evolution of different ways that they can be attractive. I just think
Yeah.
again, still baby steps. Okay, so the way that we want to close these minis is we want to hear from you guys. So why don't you drop in the comments your favorite Asian himbo that you have seen across anything? One thing we didn't mention is also fuck, what's the Bling Empire, right? Like Kevin is
Oh my
obviously an Asian
gosh.
himbo. He like milks the shit out of
Oh
his
my
sex
gosh.
factor. So there's a whole range, right? There's like reality TV, there's fiction, TV, film, K-drama, K-pop. Who's your favorite Asian himbo? Drop them in the comments. We want to see who's everyone's favorite.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, listeners. Come back next week for another fresh new episode. And until then,
再见,
再见,
bitches.
bitches.